He was just a quiet man with a simple job until one moment of courage changed everything. In a small town where the world moved slowly and secrets stayed buried, a single act of bravery set off a ripple that no one saw coming. A boy was saved, a life was shattered, and then a woman arrived, but not just any woman. What followed was not what anyone expected. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey of courage, healing, and unexpected connection, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our heartwarming and inspirational stories. If you believe in the power of kindness and second chances, you're in the right place. Now settle in, because this story begins with a man who never thought anyone would come looking for him. He lost his job after taking a bullet to save a child. Then a woman arrived with guards and secrets. The night had been quiet, too quiet, Jack Harlan thought as he made his second round of the mall parking lot. Flashlight in hand, boots crunching against loose gravel. Overhead, the January sky was a cold, slate gray, tinged faintly by the orange haze of distant city light. Snow was threatening, but hadn't yet begun to fall. Jack didn't mind the silence. At 41, silence was his friend. It didn't demand anything. It didn't expect him to fill the space with small talk. It simply let him be. That was how he liked his job at Northridge Mall. Night security, part-time hours, steady, forgettable. Just like him. His breath clouded in front of him as he walked past the darkened storefronts. Hallmark, a thrift shoe outlet, a shuttered diner. Only the 24-hour pharmacy at the end of the strip was still lit, a faint hum of fluorescent warmth casting itself out into the cold. Jack was heading that way when he heard it, a child's scream, shrill and sharp like glass shattering against ice. He ran. It didn't matter where the sound came from. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. The scream belonged to a child, and that was all he needed to know. As he rounded the corner near the pharmacy, the scene exploded into clarity. A masked man was yelling, waving a pistol at the terrified cashier behind the counter. Just outside, the glass doors crouched against the soda machine. A small boy clutched a juice box in one hand and his knees in the other. He was maybe 9 or 10 eyes wide and brimming with tears. "Don't move," the man shouted at the boy. His voice panicked. "I told you to stay back." Jack didn't see a weapon on the kid. Just fear, raw, paralyzing. Fear. He stepped into the doorway. "Hey," Jack said calmly, keeping his hands in clear view. "Let the boy go." The man turned, startled, the pistol jerking in his hand. The cashier shrieked. The boy flinched and began to sob. "Back off," the man barked. "I swear, I'll—" The gun raised, not at the cashier, not at Jack, at the kid. There are moments in life that don't come with warnings or explanations, just reflexes, just choices. Jack threw himself between the boy and the gun. The sound of the shot tore the silence like a scream through fabric. A burst of heat exploded in Jack's shoulder, and he fell to one knee. The pain came late, a tidal wave crashing into him after the impact, but he stayed upright, shield still, arms out. Body wide, behind him the boy screamed again. Sirens wailed in the distance. Too far, the man fled. Jack didn't chase him. His knees hit the pavement fully now, and the cold bit into his skin through the fabric of his uniform. Someone was shouting for help. Maybe the cashier, maybe a witness from the parking lot, Jack couldn't tell. His breath was ragged, clouding in front of him like smoke from a fire already dying out. The boy tugged at his sleeve. "Mister, are you okay? You saved me. Why would you?" Jack looked at him and gave a weak smile, the pain finally catching up to the adrenaline. "Because someone had to," he whispered, then passed out in the snow-dusted dark. Jack woke up in a hospital bed 2 days later. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, missing anything vital by a thread. The nurse told him he was lucky Jack didn't feel lucky. What he did feel was sore, not just physically, deep in his bones, not from the bullet, but from what came after. The mall's corporate office sent a letter. It was formal, unsigned. "Thank you for your bravery. Unfortunately, your actions were not in alignment with company policy. You are hereby terminated, effective immediately." He had broken protocol. Security guards were to observe and report only. Physical intervention, even in the defense of others, was beyond the scope of your position. There was no severance, no public recognition, no parade, not even a fruit basket. Only the boy's grandmother showed up, Mrs. Randall, thin and trembling, with white knuckles around a paper grocery bag. "Tommy's been asking for you," she said, her voice barely audible. "He hasn't stopped talking about the man who saved his life." Jack couldn't meet her eyes. "Tell him I'm okay." She nodded. "He says you're like a knight. He wants to draw you a sword." That made him chuckle, though it hurt like hell. When she left, the room was quiet again. Jack stared at the ceiling tiles for a long time, letting the stillness press against him like a familiar blanket. He had done the right thing that he didn't doubt. But in the days that followed, days spent recovering in a hospital with no job to return to, no medical insurance, no support, the thought returned again and again. What now? He didn't know. A week later, he was back home alone. The small house on Maple Street hadn't changed, still drafty. Near the windows, still cluttered with tools and spare parts from weekend projects. Jack moved slower now. The painkillers dulled the edge, but not the ache underneath. He was fixing the hinges on the front gate when he heard the low rumble of an engine. Not just any engine. Smooth, expensive. A black SUV, sleek and silent, pulled up to the curb. It didn't belong in his neighborhood. Too polished, too out of place. The engine idled for a moment, then quieted. The back door opened. Out stepped a woman. She wore a tailored coat in a pale perfect gray. Her boots were suede. Her hair pulled into a simple chignon gleamed like a magazine ad. Two men stepped out after her, tall, silent sunglasses in place. Despite the cloud cover, security, Jack stood still, one hand still resting on the rusty hinge of the gate. The woman approached, slow, composed, yet visibly unsettled. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes scanning him with a kind of trembling precision, as though memorizing the lines of his face. "You're Jack Harlan?" she asked, voice low and clear. He nodded, wary. "Who's asking?" She swallowed, and for a second her composure cracked. "My name is Elena Moreau," she said. "I believe you saved my son." Jack stared at her, Tommy's mother. Yes, he blinked. "I thought he lived with his grandmother." Her jaw tightened. "He does, but not because I wanted him to." A pause. Then softly, almost too quietly to hear, "I owe you a debt I can never repay." She looked past him toward the house, then back. "But I'm going to try." And in that moment, Jack knew whatever this woman had come to say, it wasn't just a thank you. It was something more, something much deeper. And whatever it was, his quiet life was about to change forever. The next morning, frost still clung to the edges of Jack's front window. He stood at the kitchen sink, coffee in hand, watching as the black SUV returned, gliding up the road like something from another world. It idled for a moment before the back door opened, just like the day before. Elena Moreau stepped out again, dressed in another impeccable coat, this time a dark navy with a matching scarf wound carefully at her neck. The two security guards lingered near the vehicle, scanning the sleepy neighborhood, as if expecting trouble to bloom from behind trimmed hedges and porch swings. Jack opened the front door before she could knock. "You're early. I didn't sleep much," Elena said. Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It had that practiced control Jack had seen in soldiers and survivors, people who carried too much and learned to carry it well. Jack gestured inside. "Coffee's hot. If that's something you drink." She nodded, stepping over the threshold with a graceful hesitation, like someone entering a sacred place. Her eyes moved across the worn wood floors, the modest furnishings, the scent of cedar and machine oil that clung to everything Jack owned. No marble counters, no art on the walls, just shelves full of tools and quiet. "I grew up in a house not much bigger than this," she said quietly. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Before or after the black SUVs and bodyguards?" She smiled faintly, the first trace of warmth he'd seen before they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. A chipped ceramic mug in front of her, steam rising between them. "I came to thank you properly," she said. "Yesterday was inadequate." "You already thanked me. I'm not finished." She reached into her coat and placed a slim envelope on the table. "This is for you." Jack didn't move. "What is it?" "Compensation." "Compensation for what?" "For saving my son's life." Jack took a sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. Then he reached for the envelope, not to open it, just to slide it gently back across the table. "I don't want it." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "You haven't even looked inside." "I don't need to. It's not a small amount," I figured. He leaned back in his chair. Miss Moreau, I didn't take a bullet for Tommy because I was looking for a payday. I know that, which is exactly why I'm offering it. Because people like you never ask, and too often they get forgotten. Jack's expression didn't change. Let me guess, this is how you've always fixed things? Something's broken. Write a check. Her face stiffened. Is that judgment I hear? No, he said softly. It's just, not me. Elena stared at him for a long moment as if trying to solve a puzzle she wasn't used to failing at. The envelope sat between them like a dare untouched. I've dealt with men who'd sell their soul for a tenth of what's in that envelope. She said, you turn it down without blinking. I'm trying to understand what kind of man that makes you. Jack shrugged. The kind who's been through enough to know what really matters. Elena looked down at the envelope, then slowly reached for it, less out of frustration than quiet respect. She tucked it away in her coat again. I don't get to meet many people like you, she said. Maybe you're spending time in the wrong rooms. A pause, then she asked, can I tell you something? Jack nodded. I didn't raise Tommy. That caught him off guard. I handed him to my mother when he was a baby. She continued staring into her cup. My husband had just died. Murdered, actually, and I was being watched, threatened. I couldn't protect him. So I gave him up. I visit from a distance. I send support, but I haven't been there. Jack's voice softened. That doesn't mean you don't love him. No, it means I failed him. Her voice cracked just slightly, and then a stranger throws himself in front of a gun for him. Someone who has no blood tie. No reason I needed to see the man who did that. Not just to thank him, but to try to understand what kind of world I've been hiding from. The words hung in the air, fragile and weighty. Jack stood walking to the kitchen counter, where a photo sat framed in cracked wood. He turned it toward her. A woman with dark hair and a dimpled smile. Her arm wrapped around Jack's. Her eyes sparkled with life. My fiancée, he said, Maggie. She was hit by a drunk driver 4 weeks before our wedding. She was walking back from choir practice. Elena looked up surprised. I'm so sorry. I spent a long time angry at the world after that. Jack said, but the truth is pain teaches you things, like who you want to be when no one's looking, what you'll stand up for, and who you're willing to protect, even if you don't know their name. He met her gaze again, firm and calm. That's why I stepped in front of that boy. Not because I'm a hero, because I remember what it feels like to lose someone you love. A silence settled deeper than before. This time, not from discomfort, but understanding. Elena stood. I think I've underestimated this town. And you, Jack, gave a small shrug. Happens all the time. She hesitated at the door. I'll be staying here for a while. In town, I'd like to spend more time with Tommy, and maybe with you, if you'll allow it. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at the SUV outside, then at the woman who seemed both polished and haunted. Start with your son, he said. The rest let it come, how it will. She nodded fair enough as she stepped outside. The wind picked up, snowflakes began to fall light and slow, as if testing the air before deciding to stay. Jack stood in the doorway watching as the SUV disappeared down the street. He closed the door not with finality, but with the quiet sense that something unexpected had begun. Something real, and maybe for the first time in a long time, that wasn't such a bad thing. It had been 4 days since Elena Moreau's visit, and Jack Harlan still found himself looking out the window longer than usual, half expecting the sleek black SUV to pull up again, though he'd never admit it aloud. But when it finally did, it wasn't Elena who stepped out first. The boy came running. Mr. Jack Tommy's voice rang out like a bell, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders as he barreled down the path toward the gate. Jack dropped his wrench mid-turn and rose to his feet, brushing the grease off his hands. Hey there, sport. You about knocked that squirrel clean off the fence. Tommy grinned, his cheeks red from the chill. Grandma said I could come by today. Mom said it was okay too. Jack's brow ticked upward. Mom Tommy pointed back toward the SUV where Elena was stepping out more slowly this time. No bodyguards flanking her, no high-heeled distance. Just a woman in a simple wool coat, her dark hair tied back, eyes softer than he remembered. She told me Tommy said about being my mom. It was kind of weird at first, but also kind of cool. Jack looked at Elena and she gave him a tentative nod. No apology, no preamble. Just honesty. Tommy had already dropped his bag and was inspecting Jack's workbench with great enthusiasm. Elena approached, hands in her coat pockets, her breath turning to fog. He took it better than I feared, she said. Said I still look too fancy to make spaghetti properly, but he's willing to give me a shot. Jack chuckled, the sound low and genuine. That's high praise coming from him. They stood there in companionable quiet for a moment, watching the boy line up screws like tiny soldiers. I didn't bring the guards today, Elena said after a pause. They think it's a mistake because of me? No, because I told them I was trying to be a mother, not a diplomat. Jack looked over at her, studying the subtle changes, less polished, more grounded. The lines around her eyes seemed less taut, as if she'd taken her first full breath in years. You sure you're ready for that? He asked. Being a mom isn't a part-time gig. I'm not ready, she admitted, but I'm here. That's a start. Jack nodded. That it is. She hesitated, glancing at Tommy. He talks about you a lot. He's a good kid. He says you make him feel safe. Jack shifted, caught off guard by the depth in her voice. I just did what anyone decent would do. Elena turned toward him. You say that like it's still common. They stood in silence, the wind rustling through the bare limbs of the maple tree overhead. Finally, she spoke again, voice low. Jack, there's something you should know about why I left him. You told me, he said gently. You were being threatened. She shook her head. That's the short version. He didn't push. He waited, and after a long breath, she continued. My husband, Peter, was an aerospace engineer. He worked for a military contractor, one of the largest in the country. So did I. I was on the executive side working with congressional liaisons, military R&D, national security. On paper, we were a golden couple. Jack nodded slowly, expression unreadable. One day, Peter came to me with something he wasn't supposed to have, a file. He said a project we'd signed off on wasn't just about defense. It had secondary applications. No one told us about human tracking, mass surveillance, things that could violate every privacy law on the books. She paused, wrapping her arms around herself. I told him not to dig. I told him to walk away, but he couldn't. He said it was bigger than both of us. Jack exhaled, steady and slow, and then a month later he was dead. Accidental gas leak in our vacation cabin. But Peter was meticulous. He didn't make mistakes like that. Jack's eyes sharpened, but he didn't interrupt Elena. He finally said, Do you think I don't think I know? And they came after me next, subtle at first. Scrutiny inquiries. Someone followed me to the daycare. I got an unmarked envelope with one of Tommy's drawings in it, something only the teacher should have had. Jack's jaw tightened. I had to disappear, at least from his life. I moved, changed numbers, hired protection. I told my mother to tell people I'd had a breakdown. Let them talk. Let them believe I was the villain. And all this time, you watched him grow up from afar. Elena nodded, eyes glistening. He thinks I abandoned him. He doesn't know I cried every night on his birthday, or that I built a trust fund for him before I built my company. Jack looked over at Tommy, now hammering 2 blocks of wood together with dramatic flair. You're telling me all this now because you risked your life for him, and because I need someone I can trust to help me bring him back into my world without breaking him. Jack turned his gaze back to her, quiet for a long moment. I'm not a counselor or a lawyer or anything useful in your world. But you're steady, Elena said. And honest, and you don't run from hard things? Jack tilted his head. You don't know that I know enough, she said softly. The boy came running, then wood shavings in his hair, and a triumphant smile on his face. Look, Mr. Jack, I made you a pencil holder. Jack took the lopsided block with a grin. That's the finest pencil holder I've ever seen. Tommy turned to Elena. Mom, can we stay for dinner? Please, Mr. Jack makes the best chili. Jack opened his mouth to object, but Elena was already smiling. If he says yes, then absolutely. Jack hesitated, then offered a crooked smile. Hope you like it spicy. Tommy whooped and ran back inside. Elena looked at Jack, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for letting us in. Jack's smile faded, replaced by something quieter. Something deeper. Just don't vanish again, he said. That kid deserves more than ghosts. I don't intend to. she replied. Not this time. As the door swung open and warmth spilled into the twilight, Jack realized something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, not loud, not fast, but real. And in this quiet, snow-dusted corner of Pennsylvania, that was more than enough to start again, Jack had never seen himself as anyone's ride to school, let alone a 10-year-old boy with a mop of hair and a knack for asking existential questions before 8 a.m. But for the past 3 days that had become his new routine, waking up early, making sure the ancient truck started in the cold, and driving Tommy Randall, now Tommy Moreau, as the kid insisted on reintroducing himself to Briar Creek Elementary. Elena rode along most mornings. She said it was because she wanted to be close to her son, but Jack suspected it was more than that. There was a kind of quiet comfort in the way she sat beside him in the cab, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face turned toward the window as if she were trying to memorize every frost-covered tree and sunlit rooftop. You don't have to do this, you know, Jack said one morning as he turned onto Riverbend Drive. You could have hired a driver. I did, Elena replied. Twice they both called me ma'am and wouldn't let Tommy eat breakfast in the car. He fired them. Jack chuckled. Sounds about right. Tommy sat in the back seat humming a made-up tune and cradling a plastic dinosaur in each hand. Mom says I can bring one toy to school today, he announced, but I told her I'm bringing two. Life is about risks, Elena turned smiling despite herself. We'll talk about that after school, little risk-taker. As they pulled up in front of the school, Jack parked behind a long line of minivans and SUVs. Kids poured out in colorful coats and backpacks, some laughing, some dragging their feet. Tommy leaned forward and gave Jack a fist bump. Thanks, Mr. Jack. You're like 90% cooler than the average grown-up. I'll take it, Jack said. Now go conquer third grade. Tommy hopped out and sprinted toward the school entrance, his breath fogging in the crisp morning air. Jack was about to put the truck in gear when Elena spoke. Would you mind taking a drive? She asked, her tone hesitant. He looked over at her. Anywhere in particular? No, she said. Just somewhere quiet. Jack didn't ask questions. He just drove. They passed the town library, the old post office, the frozen pond where kids would skate once it thickened enough to be safe. The road curved gently out toward the wooded edge of Briar Creek, where pines stood tall and solemn like sentinels guarding something sacred. Jack pulled off onto a gravel turnoff that overlooked the river. The water below moved slowly, not quite frozen, but losing its fight. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Elena spoke, her voice barely louder than the wind outside. I spent 15 years building a fortress. Jack looked at her, waiting. My company, my reputation. Everything was structured, controlled. I kept people out. I kept emotions out. It worked for a while. And then he asked him. And then a security guard stepped into a bullet for my son, she said, looking at him directly, and the walls cracked. Jack didn't answer right away. He let her words settle. I've seen people build fortresses, he finally said. And I've seen what happens when they start to crumble. It's not the noise that hurts, it's the silence after. She nodded, her hands tightening around each other. I don't know how to be a mother, Jack. Not in any way that matters. I can run a boardroom. I can negotiate with the Department of Defense. But I don't know how to sit at a kitchen table and help a boy with math homework. Then start small, Jack said. Sit at the table. Let him talk. Don't worry if you have the right answer. Just be there. Elena blinked, her eyes shimmering. Is that what Maggie did? For you, Jack stiffened slightly. She had a way of making even silence feel like conversation. That's a rare gift. I wish I could have met her. Jack smiled softly. Yeah, me too. Another silence followed, but it was less heavy this time, more companionable, the kind that stretched without snapping. Elena broke it. Can I ask you something personal? Jack nodded. Why haven't you left this town? You could have gone anywhere. Jack stared out at the river, his voice slow and measured. Because this is where Maggie's buried. Because every road out felt like forgetting her. And because maybe I was waiting for something to make staying feel like more than memory. Elena looked at him, then not as the woman from the SUV, not as the CEO, but as someone trying to find her way in a world she no longer recognized. Does it feel like that? Now she asked Jack, met her gaze. It's starting to. She turned her face back toward the window, blinking hard. When they drove back into town, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows on the street. Life moved around them, slow, steady, familiar. An old man sweeping snow off his porch, a group of kids chasing each other past the diner, a golden retriever barking happily at a squirrel. And for the first time in a long time, Elena didn't feel like a visitor. She felt like someone returning from exile, back at her temporary rental, an old craftsman-style home near the edge of town. Jack parked out front. Before stepping out, Elena turned to him once more. "Would you come by tonight?" she asked. "I was going to make dinner. Or at least attempt it." Jack raised a brow. "Is this a test of courage?" She smiled. "It's chili. Tommy says it's your specialty, so now I have a culinary benchmark to live up to." He paused, then nodded. "I'll bring cornbread." As she stepped out of the truck, she looked back at him. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." He watched her walk up the steps and close the door behind her. For a long moment, he sat there, engine off, hands resting on the wheel. Then he said, almost to himself, "Maybe some walls are meant to come down." And with that, he drove off toward the hardware store, the cornbread mix aisle, and perhaps for the first time in years, something like home. The scent of chili hung in the air like an invitation. Rich, spicy, slightly too much cumin, but forgivable for a first attempt. Jack stepped inside the old craftsman house, greeted by warmth and the clatter of spoons against bowls in the kitchen. Tommy popped his head out from behind the swinging door. "Mr. Jack, you brought cornbread, right? Please say yes." Jack held up a foil-covered tray, still warm. "You're officially my favorite adult. Don't let your mom hear that." Tommy grinned. She already knows. The house, though, rented and sparsely decorated, had begun to take on signs of life. Crayon drawings were taped to the fridge. A mismatched pair of rain boots sat near the door. And the living room bore the gentle disarray of a home being lived in. Not just occupied. Elena emerged from the kitchen apron, slightly stained, a wooden spoon in her hand like a makeshift scepter. "You survived," she said, smiling. "You made chili." Jack replied, "That's a high-stakes gamble in this town. Tommy tasted it. He didn't die good enough for me." They gathered around the table, and for a few minutes there was only the sound of spoons, the scrape of bowls, and Tommy's running commentary on which dinosaur could beat up which Star Wars character. Jack watched them both. With a quiet curiosity, Elena laughed more, now still reserved but real. She didn't check her phone. She didn't rush through the meal. She just stayed after dinner. Tommy curled up on the couch with a book while Jack and Elena cleared the table. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows in soft bursts, carrying the sharp scent of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. "Thank you," she said as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. For making it all feel less like I'm faking it." "You're not faking it, I am," she said softly. "But I'm starting to hope I won't have to, forever." Jack leaned against the counter. Hope's not a bad place to start. She opened her mouth to say something more. But before the words came, there was a sudden knock at the front door. 3 short raps, sharp, precise. Elena froze. Jack noticed it instantly. The way her posture shifted, how her breath caught. He straightened, alert, expecting someone. He asked, "No." She moved toward the door, slowly, caution etched across her face. Jack followed, positioning himself just behind her right shoulder. When she opened the door, it wasn't a neighbor or a friend. It was a man in a charcoal suit, holding a slim leather briefcase and wearing the kind of polished smile that felt like a warning. "Ilona," he said with smooth familiarity, "you've been hard to find." Ilona stiffened. "Hello, Victor." Jack's muscles tensed. The name alone set off alarm bells. Victor stepped inside, uninvited eyes sweeping the room with casual authority. Charming place. Quaint. Like something out of a Hallmark movie. Jack stepped forward. "Can I help you, Victor?" Barely glanced at him. "And you must be the local hero, Jack Harlan, right? The man with the bullet hole and the outdated pickup truck." Jack didn't smile. "Say what you came to say." Victor turned his attention back to Elena. "The board is nervous. Your absence, the shift in leadership. It's all causing uncertainty. Investors want reassurance. DC wants reassurance." "I'm not on the board anymore," Elena said, folding her arms. "You're Elena Moreau. Your name is the board. I left publicly." Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't get to leave something like this. Not when you know what you know. Not with the tech you helped to design still active. Jack took a step forward. She told you she's out. That should be the end of it. Victor finally turned to him, the smile gone. Do you have any idea what kind of people you're dealing with, Mr. Harlan? This isn't about local politics or who wins the county fair. This is national security contracts. Billions. You don't just walk away from that. I'm not afraid of you, Jack said, voice calm, but firm. You should be. Before Jack could respond, Elena stepped between them. Leave, Victor. Elena, I said leave. You don't get to show up at my home in front of my child and threaten me. I built that company. I broke myself to make it what it was. And now I'm done. I will not be dragged back into a world that cost me my husband and nearly took my son. Victor studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then with a slight incline of his head, he stepped back toward the door. Just remember, he said as he turned the handle, the past doesn't sleep and neither do the people who profit from it. Then he was gone. Elena closed the door slowly, her hands trembling. Jack reached out. You okay? She nodded, but her voice cracked. I don't want this near Tommy. It won't be. I thought if I stepped away, if I disappeared, it would end. Jack shook his head. It never ends until you turn and face it. She looked up at him, fear and resolve battling in her eyes. And if I face it, then you don't face it alone, he said. In the living room, Tommy stirred and looked up, sleepy-eyed. Mom, everything okay? Elena walked over and knelt beside him, brushing his hair from his forehead. Yeah, baby. Everything's okay. But her voice faltered just slightly. Jack watched them for a moment, then turned to the window. Outside, the street was empty again. Quiet, but it no longer felt like peace. It felt like a calm before something much bigger, something long overdue. And this time Jack knew he wouldn't be standing on the sidelines. By mid-February, Briar Creek had softened from its post-holiday stillness. The snow hadn't quite melted, but the icicles hanging from rooftops were shorter now, dripping in slow rhythm. Life moved in that slow, predictable way it always did in small towns. Farmers at the diner before dawn, church bells marking the hours, kids with snow boots hanging halfway off their feet as they ran for the school buses. Elena had never stayed in one place long enough to feel the pull of routine. But now as she stood on the steps of Tommy's school, with a paper cup of hot cocoa warming her hands, she found herself strangely anchored. It was Jack who had insisted she come Parents' Day. He'd told her, his voice calm but firm, if you want him to know you're not running anymore, start with showing up. And so she did. It was a modest affair, folding chairs in a multi-purpose room that smelled of crayons and glue sticks, a table of baked goods donated by the PTA, and construction paper hearts plastered on every wall. Elena sat quietly in the back, at first unsure how to belong in this simple, noisy world. The last time she'd stood before an audience, it had been at a shareholders meeting in D.C., presenting quarterly defense analytics to a room full of men in tailored suits. Here she was, just Tommy's mom, the woman who no one had ever seen until now. Tommy spotted her from across the room and waved like a lighthouse in a storm. Mom, over here. And just like that, she wasn't invisible anymore. Jack arrived a few minutes later, hair still damp from the morning snow, wearing a flannel jacket and holding a tin of cornbread muffins under one arm. Elena felt her chest loosen at the sight of him, as if his presence tethered her to the floor. He slid into the seat beside her, nudging the tin toward her with a half smile. Brought reinforcements. She smirked. You bribe your way through everything with food, only the important things. Tommy's class performed a short skit about friendship and courage. Tommy played a boy who taught a robot how to feel, which Elena found both hilarious and oddly touching. Afterward, there were photos, juice boxes, and parents comparing local dentists and allergy remedies like wartime strategies. Elena made it through a conversation with another mother about sledding accidents without once checking her phone. When someone asked her where she worked, she said, "I'm between things," and meant it. Later, outside by the parking lot, she and Jack leaned against the hood of his truck while Tommy ran laps with a few classmates, his laughter ringing across the frozen schoolyard. "Thank you," Elena said, brushing snow from her sleeve. "I didn't think I could do this." "You didn't just do it," Jack replied. You showed up. That's more than most. She turned toward him. You make it sound so simple. It's not, he admitted. But simple things aren't always easy. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the children play the clouds moving slow across the pale sky. I need to tell him, she said, about his father. About what really happened. Jack didn't respond right away. Then he nodded slowly. When the time's right. I used to believe there was never a right time for anything, she said. Just windows of opportunity. Now I think maybe time opens differently when you're not rushing through everything. You're learning how to be still. Jack said, that's not nothing. She studied his face, weathered, honest, the kind of face that didn't hide behind titles or curated smiles. Do you ever miss the world you used to be part of? I miss pieces of it, he said. The brotherhood, the sense of purpose. But not the noise, Elena nodded slowly. Me too. They fell into an easy quiet again, but it was broken a moment later by the sound of a car engine behind them. A black SUV, not hers, not Victor's either. Jack straightened instantly, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert. The vehicle didn't stop. It cruised past, slowly, windows tinted too dark for a small-town street, then turned a corner and disappeared. Elena didn't speak, but Jack noticed the way her hand curled into a fist. Could be nothing, he said, or it could be a reminder. She replied. He looked at her. You still think they're watching? I know they are. Jack nodded once, then we keep watching back. They picked Tommy up, waved goodbye to the other parents, and drove back through the town square. Elena was quieter than usual on the ride home, her gaze flicking to the rearview mirror now and then. Back at the house, Jack walked her to the porch, Tommy already bounding ahead inside, tugging off his scarf and shouting about building a snow fort in the backyard. Elena paused at the top of the steps. I'm afraid that if I let myself be happy, something's going to take it away again. Jack didn't try to convince her otherwise. He just stepped closer, lowering his voice. Maybe it will, but maybe not, and maybe this time. You'll have someone to fight beside you. She looked up at him, her eyes vulnerable in a way that made his chest tighten. I'm still scared, she whispered. Good, he said. That means you've got something worth losing. The wind kicked up a swirl of snow across the yard, but the light from inside the house spilled warm across the porch. Come in for dinner, she said quietly. Jack hesitated for just a beat, and then he followed her inside. The wind came in colder that evening, a sharp drop that sent pine needles scattering across the porch and rattled the loose gutters on Elena's rented house. Jack had just finished tightening the latch on the back gate when he heard it, a sound too deliberate for a falling branch, too soft for a car door. It was subtle, but it scratched at the edges of instinct. He turned, scanning the tree line behind the property, his breath fogging in the air. Nothing moved. Still, his fingers itched for the handle of the old flashlight. He always carried the one, with the dented grip and a battery that hadn't died on him once in 5 years. He flicked it on, casting a beam through the skeletal trees, only darkness and drifting snow. But Jack knew better than to trust quiet too quickly. Inside the house buzzed with warmth and normalcy. Tommy was somewhere between finishing his homework and negotiating for more screen time, while Elena stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, drying the dishes with a patterned towel she hadn't known she liked until she bought it last week. When Jack stepped inside, he took off his boots silently and stood near the door longer than usual. Elena noticed something wrong. He shook his head. Probably nothing, might just be the wind in the trees, but she knew that tone low, measured. Not nothing. Do you think someone's out there? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. I think someone might be watching, or maybe testing the line to see how close they can get without being seen. She set the towel down slowly, her face shifting into the kind of composure that used to get her through congressional briefings and press inquiries. Jack stepped closer. I'll drive by later tonight, just in case. Elena nodded, but her jaw tightened. I thought I left this behind. I thought if I was quiet enough, small enough, they'd forget. Jack looked at her, steady and quiet. They didn't forget, but you're not the same woman who ran. Her eyes met his, and if they push again, then they'll find out you don't run anymore. They didn't say anything for a while, just stood there in the fading kitchen light, the warmth from the stove rising in soft waves. Outside, the wind howled again, less like weather and more like warning. At 2:13 a.m., Jack's truck rolled quietly along the edge of the woods behind Elena's house. He killed the headlights 2 lots down and parked beneath an old oak half hidden behind a rusting fence. He sipped lukewarm coffee from a thermos, the kind that tasted more like habit than comfort. The stars were out clear and sharp in the winter sky. No wind now, no owls, no movement. That was what bothered him most, the unnatural stillness. Then he saw it. A flicker of light, small, low to the ground, barely visible behind a thicket. A red pulse, a motion sensor or a surveillance device. It blinked twice, then vanished. Jack's chest tightened. He stepped out quietly, boots crunching the frost-hardened grass. He moved with the old familiarity of a man who'd once walked enemy perimeters by moonlight, who knew the sound of a careless footfall could be the difference between safety and something far worse. He reached the spot where the light had been and crouched low. Nothing there now, but something had been a footprint. Just one pressed into the frozen earth. Deep, deliberate, boot-treaded. Jack took a picture of it with his phone, then turned back toward the house, his mind already sorting through what this could mean. It wasn't kids, it wasn't hunters, it was a message. The next morning, Jack stood in Elena's kitchen again, his face unreadable, the photograph displayed on the screen of his phone. She stared at the boot print. That's military issue, special ops, maybe Jack said. Or private contractor, which is worse. No chain of command, no oversight. Tommy sat in the living room watching cartoons, unaware of the tension humming in the walls around him. Victor, Elena asked. Possibly, Jack said. Or someone else. Either way, they're getting close. Testing boundaries. Elena's hands trembled and she gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles paled. I'm not dragging my son through another exile. Jack placed a steady hand over hers. Then we draw our own lines and we make it clear they're not the only ones watching. She looked at him, her eyes glassy with fear, but also with something else. Determination, I need to call someone, she said after a pause. Someone who still owes me a favor. Jack arched a brow. Friend or foe? Both, she said, but he hates losing control more than he hates me. He didn't ask for a name. He trusted her judgment more than he would have months ago. Later that afternoon, Elena picked Tommy up from school. She didn't send anyone else. She didn't delegate. She did it herself, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting over the phone in her coat pocket, a silent promise waiting to be delivered. That night after dinner and dishes and the gentle chaos of bedtime, Elena stepped out onto the porch alone. Jack joined her a few minutes later, holding 2 mugs of tea. They're not going to stop, are they? She asked. No, Jack said simply, but neither are we. She sipped her tea. Do you think I'm being foolish for staying? No, he said. I think you're being brave. A long silence stretched between them, but it wasn't awkward. It felt earned, like 2 people who had come to understand the weight of words and the deeper weight of silence. Then she turned toward him. If I'd met you 5 years ago, I wouldn't have known what to do with someone like you. Jack gave a faint smile. Probably would have had me escorted out of the lobby. Twice. They both laughed, quiet and real, until the cold pulled them back into the moment. Inside, Tommy was fast asleep, unaware of the shifting tide beneath the surface of their quiet town. But Jack knew what was coming, and for the first time he wasn't preparing to fight alone. The morning came wrapped in a strange hush, the kind of stillness that made birds delay their song and coffee taste slightly sharper. Jack felt it the moment he stepped out onto his porch, an air too still for comfort, the sky too gray for trust. He sipped from his mug and looked toward Elena's house, just visible down the street. No movement yet, probably still asleep or trying to pretend the day would unfold like any other. He understood the effort, but something in his chest told him that illusion wouldn't last past noon. He was right, it happened around 10:30. Elena had just settled Tommy into his Zoom tutoring session. His school had gone virtual for the week due to a burst pipe, and she was finally exhaling when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Not hard, not aggressive, but precise. Jack had taught her to recognize the difference. She opened the door to find a man in plain clothes, late 50s. Short gray hair, clean shaven. No smile, no badge. Just a leather portfolio under one arm and a gaze that had seen things best not spoken of over breakfast. Elena Moreau, he asked, already knowing. Yes, I need 10 minutes. She hesitated, then she stepped aside. Jack arrived barely 4 minutes later. Elena didn't call him. She didn't need to. He'd seen the unmarked sedan out front, the kind that didn't belong in towns like Briar Creek. He knocked once and walked in without waiting. The man turned in his chair and stood. "You must be Mr. Harland." Jack didn't offer his hand. "Depends on who's asking." The man set the portfolio on the coffee table and unzipped it slowly. "You can call me Keller. I'm with the Office of Strategic Compliance. We operate adjacently to federal agencies. Think of us as janitors for secrets." Elena crossed her arms. "I know who you are. You're the ones who sweep up after the mess is made. We also keep the mess from becoming a headline." Jack's jaw tightened. "Get to the point." Keller removed a manila folder and slid it across the table. Elena hesitated, then opened it. Inside were satellite images, technical readouts, even a photo of Tommy's school circled in red ink. Elena's voice was ice. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Keller said calmly. "I'm giving you the truth." Jack stepped forward. "Your truth or the truth?" Keller looked at him, almost amused. "The truth is that Project Glaive, the very one Ms. Moreau authorized 6 years ago, is no longer dormant. It's been picked up by a third-party contractor operating out of Munich. They're using fragments of the code your late husband buried." Elena's face lost color. Keller continued. "We believe someone in your company made the sale post your resignation, but your name is still tied to the original patent. That makes you a liability. And unfortunately, Mr. Harland, anyone within your proximity becomes one too." Jack didn't flinch. "You're not here just to warn us, no." Keller said, "I'm here to ask for your cooperation." "Define cooperation," Elena said. "We need you to access the off-grid servers Peter left behind. You know where they are. You know the cipher keys. If you help us retrieve the original code completely, we can lock it down, destroy the derivative versions, and remove your name from any future inquiry. And if I don't, then we can't guarantee your safety." Or your son's Jack moved so quickly, Keller didn't see it coming. 1 second he was standing still. The next he had Keller pinned to the wall by his collar, voice a low growl. "You don't say his name. Not like that, not like he's leverage." Keller didn't struggle. His face remained blank. "I'm not your enemy, Mr. Harlan, but you need to understand the scale." Jack released him with a shove and stepped back. Elena was trembling, but not with fear, with fury. "You think I haven't lived with this every day," she said, her voice raw. "That I haven't relived every decision, every signature. My husband died trying to bury this. I left everything to protect my child. And now you come in here, threaten us, and ask for help, as if it's a favor." Keller picked up his briefcase. "I'm asking because I believe you still care enough to stop what's coming. We have 48 hours after that. This isn't just about reputation. It's about global destabilization. It's about real lives." He walked to the door, then paused. "You can run again, or you can finish what he started." The door clicked shut behind him. Elena sank into the couch, her hands gripping the folder so tightly the edges curled. Jack sat across from her. "Do you know where the server is?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, but getting there means going back to everything I've avoided. Everything I swore I wouldn't touch again." Jack leaned forward. "You're not the woman who ran away anymore." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "No, I'm a mother, and I'm afraid that's what makes you strong." They sat like that for a while, the folder between them as heavy as any weapon. Finally, Jack spoke. "We'll go together." Elena shook her head. "It's not your fight." He met her gaze with quiet conviction. "Then make it mine." Tommy's laughter echoed faintly from the other room, a soft, fragile thread tethering them to a world worth saving. And with that, Elena knew this time she wouldn't face the darkness alone. They left just after sunset. The mountains west of Briar Creek were still crusted with old snow, though the valleys below were beginning to thaw into early spring. Jack's truck climbed the winding roads in near silence. The only sound the steady churn of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under tire. Elena sat in the passenger seat, shoulders rigid, fingers interlaced in her lap. She had barely spoken since they'd left the house. Tommy was safe tucked away with Mrs. Randall, unaware that his mother and the man he adored were driving into a place neither of them had planned to revisit. Jack glanced over at her, then back to the road. "You okay?" She didn't look at him. No good, he said. Means you're paying attention. That earned the ghost of a smile. I hate how calm you are. He kept his eyes forward. I'm not calm. I'm focused. Big difference. The compound, what Elena called the vault, was nestled inside a decommissioned radar station, a relic of Cold War paranoia long since stripped of funding and maps. It sat halfway up a hillside hidden behind a rusted gate that groaned when Jack pushed it open. I haven't been here in 6 years, she murmured, stepping out into the sharp mountain air. The station was half swallowed by nature. Now ivy crawled along the concrete walls, pine needles carpeted the path to the door, but the keypad beside the steel entry still blinked. Waiting, Elena hesitated for half a second, then punched in a code. Nothing. She tried again. Another code, then a third. The door clicked. Jack gave a low whistle. Still remember, some things stay with you, she said. Inside, the temperature dropped. The hallways smelled of dust and metal and old memory. Elena moved ahead, Jack following, close flashlight cutting through the dark. The server room was deep in the back, past a series of corridors lined with rusting shelves and obsolete tech. When they reached it, Elena exhaled slowly, as if bracing herself to enter. Not a room, but a grave. Jack watched her approach the terminal, one of the last cold storage repositories in the country for encrypted biometric data, and type in a second series of codes. A soft hum filled the room as old fans spun to life. I buried everything here, she said. The core program, the trace protocols, even Peter's notes. We built this system for traceability in the field rescue missions, missing personnel. But someone twisted the application into something else. She pulled out a flash drive from her jacket pocket. This is the counter code, she added. Peter created it before he died. It's like a back door. If I run it, it'll collapse the whole framework, burn it from the inside. Jack leaned against a wall, arms folded. Then what are we waiting for? She stared at the screen. I don't know what else it's connected to. She admitted, I built this system to branch to protect itself. Destroying it might trigger automated alerts, security flags in agencies I've never even spoken to. Keller made it sound clean, but it won't be. Jack stepped forward. Will it protect your son? Yes, he looked her in the eye. Then you know what to do. She inserted the drive. Lines of code filled the screen, thousands of cascading lines, memories in machine language. Elena's fingers flew over the keys, accessing buried files, disabling contingency firewalls. She moved with precision, her face set with the resolve of a woman who was no longer running, but choosing. Then a red window flashed on the screen. Autonomous node response. Initiated external ping. Detected. Jack stood straight. That bad? Yes, she said. Voice clipped. That means someone's already connected to the system. We just woke them up. Suddenly the lights dimmed. A high-pitched tone rang through the station, long and low. Jack's instincts flared. Time to go, he said. I need 60 seconds. You've got 30. The hum of the servers grew louder, almost agitated. Elena's hands moved faster. Then one final command. Confirm termination. She hit yes. The room powered down with a jolt. Everything went still. Jack was already moving, grabbing Elena's hand and pulling her down the corridor. Behind them, somewhere in the bowels of the system, a siren flickered to life, a soft beep, beep, beep that promised escalation. They burst through the exit door just as a black SUV screeched to a halt at the bottom of the hill. Go, Jack shouted, practically lifting Elena into the truck. He slammed the door shut and hit the gas tires, kicking up gravel as the headlights swept across the woods. Behind them, the other vehicle gave chase. No sirens, no lights, just raw pursuit. Who the hell are they? Elena asked, bracing herself. Not Keller's people. Jack said, too fast, too quiet. These are freelancers. The road narrowed as the truck dipped into the curve of the mountain. Jack took it sharp, the tires barely gripping, adrenaline surging like a second heart in his chest. Then up ahead, a fallen tree. Hold on, he barked. He yanked the wheel and veered off the shoulder into the brush, grinding over frozen roots and half-buried stones. The truck bucked and fought him, but it held. They burst through a clearing and back onto a secondary service road. The SUV behind them hesitated too long and clipped the tree, losing momentum. Jack didn't stop driving until they were 5 miles out, hidden behind a ridge of pines, the engine steaming from exertion. Inside the cab, neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Elena turned toward him, chest rising and falling. "It's done," she said. Jack looked at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I felt it. The system went cold. It's over." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Some enemies didn't vanish when a server went dark. Some enemies had already arrived. As they sat in the cold dark, Jack reached across the cab, took her hand, and said the one thing neither of them had dared believe for weeks. "We're going home." The truck rumbled down Briar Creek's main street just as the sun began slipping behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the town's narrow storefronts. A light dusting of snow shimmered on the rooftops, catching the last golden rays like a final applause before nightfall. Jack parked 2 blocks from Elena's rental, cutting the engine and letting the silence settle. In the seat beside him, Elena exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Did you ever think," she said quietly, "that you go from fixing porch railings to evading armed contractors in the mountains?" Jack gave a tired smile. "Thought my wild days ended when I stopped carrying a badge." "Well," she murmured, "turns out fate had other plans." Neither moved to exit the truck right away. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a hollow echo, and the ache of muscles stretched too far for too long. Jack looked over. "You sure you're ready for tonight?" Elena tilted her head. "It's the harvest dinner, not a Senate hearing." "You've never been to one," Jack said. "Briar Creek harvest dinner's like Thanksgiving, with half the county words already out that you're attending." She raised a brow. "And that's a problem. Depends on whether you prefer gossip before or after dessert." That earned a real laugh from her, short, tired, but honest. "I think I can handle it." Jack nodded, opening his door. "Then let's go show them what resilience looks like inside the town hall." The lights were warm, strung with garlands and paper stars made by school children. The room buzzed with soft music and the clink of dishes. Long tables were set with crock-pots, casseroles, pies, and platters of every shape. This was no formal affair, just neighbors feeding neighbors. But to Elena, it felt like the most disarming room she'd ever entered. Jack led her through the crowd. People turned to look, some subtly, others not. She caught snippets. "That's her Tommy's mom. I heard she's some kind of tech mogul. Didn't she used to live in D.C.? But Jack walked steadily as though the stairs bounced right off him. And with him beside her, Elena felt strangely untouchable. Near the back, they found their seats, 2 chairs next to Mrs. Randall and Tommy, who waved a piece of cornbread like a flag. "You're late," he said. Jack leaned down. "Had to make sure the world didn't end before dessert." Mrs. Randall leaned in. "We saved you some of Ruthie's apple cobbler. It's medicinal." Elena smiled gratefully, sitting down. The warmth of the room began to thaw the lingering chill in her bones. Across the table, a man in his 60s raised his cup. "Miss Moreau?" Elena turned. "I just wanted to say it's good to see someone come back. This town's got its share of people who leave and never do." "Thank you," she said, unsure what else to offer. He nodded. "You've got grit." "That's more than most." Elena didn't respond right away. But later, when plates were cleared and the lights dim for the children's choir to sing, she felt something in her chest loosen. She wasn't home, not yet, but she wasn't an outsider anymore either. After the choir, after the applause and the coffee, Jack and Elena slipped outside into the quiet of the street. Snow had started again, dusting the ground in a way that made the town look dreamlike, half forgotten, half awake. They walked slowly, passing the glowing windows of the bakery, the post office, the darkened antique shop with its slightly crooked bell. "People here," Elena said softly. "They're nothing like I expected. You expected pitchforks. I expected suspicion, closed doors. But they gave me cornbread and a compliment." Jack smiled. "That's how Briar Creek welcomes you. Small gestures with long roots." They reached the front porch of her house. Tommy was asleep with his grandmother for the night. The house behind them glowed amber from the lone lamp left on inside. Elena turned to face him, her breath forming small clouds in the cold. "I didn't know I could come back from what I did," she said. "Not the secrets, not the damage. But I sat in a room full of strangers tonight and felt forgiven, even if they don't know what for. Jack took her gloved hands in his. Maybe it's not about being forgiven, he said. Maybe it's about forgiving yourself. She held his gaze, eyes searching. How do you do that? You don't do it all at once. He said, you start small. You sit with the truth. You stop running, and you let someone stand beside you when it gets hard. Elna's voice was barely audible. You stood beside me even when you didn't have to. Jack shrugged. You stood in front of something much bigger than me. You faced it. I just made sure you didn't face it alone. Snowflakes drifted down around them. The wind was quiet, like the town itself had paused to listen. Elna took a slow breath, and then so softly it barely broke the silence. Asked, would you like to come in for a while? Jack didn't answer with words. He simply followed her inside. It was long after midnight when Elena sat at the kitchen table alone. The only sound, the soft tick of the old wall clock above the pantry and the rhythmic whisper of wind against the windows. The house, for once, was still. Tommy slept soundly in the next room. Jack had left an hour ago after a quiet dinner and a conversation that lingered more in glances than words. She hadn't asked him to stay, and he hadn't offered. But the space he left behind felt full, not empty. Before her sat a sheet of thick stationery she'd taken from the drawer where she kept warranties and old legal pads. The pen in her hand hovered uncertain. She hadn't written a letter by hand in years, but tonight it felt necessary. Paper had a way of holding truth better than pixels ever could. She began. To the man who saved my son. You told me once that you weren't a hero, that you only did what anyone would have done. You were wrong. I've spent much of my life surrounded by people who measured everything in power. Numbers, risk. In that world, we calculated what was worth saving, and who you never made such calculations. You saw a scared boy and threw your body between him and a bullet, not because it was profitable, not because it would earn you favor, but because it was right. That moment, your instinct, your courage changed the course of two lives, his and mine. I want to tell you something I've never said aloud. Not even to Peter when he was alive. I believed the world didn't allow softness, that love was a liability, that goodness could be broken, manipulated, monetized. Then you walked into our lives with quiet strength, muddy boots, and eyes that saw far more than I was ready to admit. And you proved me wrong. You didn't try to fix me. You didn't ask me to be someone I couldn't be. You simply stayed. When the fear returned, you didn't push me through it. You stood beside me in it. When I doubted I could protect my son, you reminded me that standing up doesn't always mean standing alone. You made room for my uncertainty, and you gave me space to grow without ever once making me feel small. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know what will come next or how long peace will stay before something else tries to take it. But I know this. If you're still willing, I want to build whatever comes next with you in it. Not as a guest, not as a protector, but as a partner. And if your answer is yes, I'll make you my promise now. No more running, no more hiding, just us here now. Elna. She finished the letter just before dawn, folding it carefully and slipping it into an envelope without sealing it. Her hand lingered over the flap, unsure. It wasn't a confession exactly. It was an invitation, a vow, but only if he chose to open it. The next day, while Tommy played in the backyard with two neighborhood kids and the scent of bread, baking filled the house, Elna tucked the letter into a drawer in the entryway table, just where Jack always left his gloves. She didn't leave a note, didn't text, just let it sit there like a truth between breaths waiting to be discovered. That evening, Jack stopped by with a bag of apples from the farmer's market and a stack of mail she'd forgotten to pick up. He didn't ask questions, didn't comment on the way her hair was pulled back in a loose braid or the fact that she was wearing socks with tiny books printed on them. He handed her the mail, leaned down to ruffle Tommy's hair, and then wandered to the entryway like he always did, where he'd hang his jacket and set down his keys. A minute later, he was quiet, too quiet. Elna didn't turn around. She kept stirring the soup on the stove, not because it needed stirring, but because her hands were too unsure to do anything else. Behind her, the soft shuffle of paper, then silence, then footsteps. Then "Hey, Jack," said his voice, lower than usual, roughened with something unspoken. She turned. He held the letter unfolded, now gripped carefully in one hand. He didn't speak. He just stepped forward, closed the space between them with a kind of certainty that had taken months to build, and set the letter down on the counter. Then in a voice steadier than she expected, he said, "I've already been yours, Elena, since the moment you opened that door and told me your name." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "Then stay," she said simply. He didn't answer. He kissed her instead. Slow, certain. Real, and the room, the house, the past. They all fell quiet, because the only thing louder than the ghosts was the sound of choosing each other. The sun filtered through the kitchen window in soft gold, casting a warm glow over the breakfast table, where 3 mugs sat steaming, 2 with coffee, 1 with cocoa topped with marshmallows that were slowly melting into the swirl. Jack leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight, while Tommy animatedly recounted his dream from the night before. Something about robot cows and a treehouse in space. Elena watched her son with a quiet smile, chin resting in her hand, her other arm brushing gently against Jack's where their sleeves touched. The kitchen had become a sanctuary. Not perfect, not polished, but theirs. There was a chipped tile near the stove that Jack kept saying he'd fix, but never quite got around to, and a tiny crack in the windowsill where Tommy liked to wedge, found feathers and lucky rocks. Elena had started leaving her phone in a drawer during breakfast. The alerts would wait. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for news, she was living in it. Jack looked around as if memorizing the moment he caught her watching him, and tilted his head. What? She shrugged. "You look like you're trying to take a mental picture." "Maybe I am." Well, she smiled. "Don't forget the marshmallow explosion in the corner." Tommy pointed his spoon dramatically. "That's part of the dream sequence." Jack laughed, and for a while there was only the comfort of familiar voices and the low murmur of a home that had finally found its rhythm. After breakfast, Jack offered to drive Mrs. Randall to her appointment at the clinic across town. Elena handed him a list for the market, a real one this time, written in pen and not in his head. "I'll start the sauce for dinner," she said, following him to the door. Jack paused, one hand on the knob. He turned to her, eyes soft. "I'll be back by 6. Elena leaned in, resting a hand on his chest. "I know." He kissed her forehead. No hesitation, no need for permission anymore, and left with the easy confidence of a man who knew he belonged. The day passed slowly, the kind of quiet Sunday that made time feel slower in the best possible way. Elena prepped the kitchen: garlic, onions, tomatoes, basil. The music played low in the background, some old jazz Tommy had picked off a vintage vinyl at the town fair. They danced a little, stirred the pot together, argued over the correct number of meatballs. She didn't check her email once. At 5:47, the knock came. Not Jack's. Her heart stuttered just for a moment, but it wasn't a threat this time. It was Ruthie from down the block dropping off extra bread she'd baked. Behind her, 2 neighborhood boys rode their bikes past the yard, shouting about a broken chain and someone's dog that had escaped again. Life in Briar Creek uninterrupted. At 6:02, Jack pulled up. Elena saw him through the window, his silhouette against the dusk. One handful of groceries, the other, helping Mrs. Randall out of the truck with patient ease. He opened the door without knocking, like always now. "Smells like heaven," he said. Stepping into the kitchen, Elena took the bags, nudging his shoulder. "That's the basil." Or me, could be either. Jack dropped his keys in the bowl and looked around. "I stopped by the post office." "This was in your box." He handed her a thick white envelope. No return address, just a government seal, and her name printed cleanly across the front. She stared at it for a moment. The air between them shifted. Jack saw it. "Want me to step out?" She shook her head. "No, stay." He waited as she opened it, slowly, fingers careful. Inside was a single page, an official statement acknowledging the permanent shutdown of Project Glaive verification of the counter code execution, and a note confirming her name had been removed from all attached documentation. At the bottom, in neat black type, was a final sentence. "Thank you for your service and for choosing the right side of history." That was it. No signature, no call, just quiet closure. Elena exhaled. She looked up at Jack. "It's done for real this time." Jack nodded, his voice low. "Then maybe now, you get to live." She placed the paper on the counter beside the recipe card Tommy had written in purple marker, titled "Mom's Famous Pasta," even if she's new at it. Her eyes welled up, not from fear, from relief. from the sudden and undeniable knowledge that she wasn't standing in a fortress anymore. She was standing in a kitchen in a home. Later that night, after the dishes were done, and Tommy was upstairs brushing his teeth loudly and off-key, Jack stepped out onto the porch. Elna followed with 2 mugs of tea, handing him one, before leaning against the railing beside him. The stars were out in full, glittering across the inky sky, like pinpricks in a velvet curtain. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called low and slow. Elna sipped her tea, then turned to him. I used to think happy endings were for other people. For simpler lives, for people who never had to choose between safety and truth. Jack was quiet for a beat, and now she looked at him. Really looked at him. I think happy endings aren't something you're handed. They're something you build with calloused hands and stubborn hearts. He smiled at that. So, what do we build next? She let the question hang in the air for a moment, then said softly, "Start with dinner tomorrow night." He raised a brow. "Dinner." She nodded, then turned to go back inside. But just before the door shut, she looked over her shoulder and said with a grin, "Will you stay for it?" Jack didn't answer right away. He just followed her in, like he always would. Like she'd always hoped, like home. Every story means something different to each of us. Maybe it reminded you of someone you once knew, or a moment you'll never forget. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel and how they connect us across cities, countries, and oceans. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful and uplifting tales about love, courage, and second chances. Thank you so much for watching. We're honored to have shared this moment with you. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the good.